Welcome to Slash Forward. Today we're going to ponder a scenario that's likely better left to the imagination. So imagine, if you will, moving out to the country with dreams of becoming a small-town physician, only to discover the market has evaporated, you didn't spend enough to get a good inspection on your new home, and you're living directly in the middle of a prime spider orgy melting pot that consists of a highly aggressive and organized, previously undescribed Venezuelan murder spider linking up with the most robust local variety. As pets begin to go missing and people around town begin dying mysteriously, you find yourself unable to mount a solid investigation or elicit any sort of cooperation due to your lack of social currency. As a true arachnophobe, when things do go well, the ultimate solution ends up being the worst possible scenario that could be created for you. What options would be open to you when Mother Nature herself has decided to hit the self-destruct button? Is there even enough fire available, and would it burn at a sufficient heat to rid the town of this scourge? In order to try to figure this all out, we're going to summon our courage and be brave and examine the 1990 creature feature, Arachnophobia. Yes, we have to do it. I've already watched the movie. Be sure to keep your eyes peeled for any missed opportunities and leave a comment with any tips or tricks you've developed for managing spider situations in your personal life. Let's get to it. We open over a rainforest at dusk and take a trip down the lazy river. Deep in the heart of the forest, Mr. Manley is eventually delivered to Dr. Atherton's camp. Arriving late, he is immediately whisked off toward the wilderness. His task is to photograph their venture into a tepui,
a place where species have survived in isolation for millions of years.
On the way in, Manley is provided the helpful warning that much of the fauna here would desire to digest his nutrient-rich flesh, so it's best to try not to touch or be touched by anything in the dense Venezuelan rainforest. We get some big Jurassic Park vibes as they touch down near a lush sinkhole. The equipment is lowered to the bottom as they prepare to hike it, guideless, as the tribesman who has agreed to assist them only promised to take them as far as the trailhead, apparently. Well, thanks, I guess. They reunite with their equipment and Manley face plants his way into a terrible discovery, which is brushed off as they proceed deep into the belly button of the wilderness. They find a nice big tree and begin setting up. The plan? Smoke 'em if you got 'em. They don't have to wait long before untold quantities of specimens rain down on them, with only about 10% actually landing in the jars they set up. As they sift through, greedy for new discoveries, they hear some louder thuds and find a collection of big honkin' spiders. They're amazed to find that they survived the smoke show, so they snag a couple of samples plus one stowaway. Back at the camp, it's discovered that these are soldier spiders. They have no reproductive organs and likely serve a single general. Fascinating as this all is, Manley needs to go try to nap off his fever. Unfortunately, he has an unwelcome bedfellow which sinks its bite things into him, exacerbating his already present illness to a significant degree. When he's found, they presume he succumbed to his fever, allowing them to proceed with a clean conscience. With no reverence for the empty shell, they strip his belongings of any valuable film stock and then send his empty meat suit back stateside in a shipping crate sans packing materials, but with one more spider than is typically desirable. On the other side of the water, we catch up with the hearse as it delivers him to a simple small-town funeral home. Irv cracks the top and then makes a quick call about the open casket situation. You see, Big Roy's taken advantage of the long trip over to turn Manley into his own personal bento box. He then shuffles out, scaring off the domestics before being granted fast travel by a passing crow. He manages to end the livery service right near an old barn, right as the Jennings roll up to their new home. Here we meet Ross, who has arrived in Canaima with his family to raise his children in a nurturing environment, take over the practice of the soon-to-retire town physician, and to find enough space to stretch out and build a bitchin' wine cellar. Tom rushes out to complain that there's a spider on his stuff. In this household, it's the wife's duty to handle these situations, so Molly gently removes the spider and gives her a new home in the barn. That evening, the couple briefly discusses their anxieties and expectations around their new life away from the city and provide each other carnal comfort, while barnside, a couple of new acquaintances come together in similar sensual pleasure. The next day, we find Ross in dire straits. Old man Metcalf has thought it over and decided that he wants to postpone his retirement. To add to this, Sheriff Parsons declines to show the reverence Ross feels is owed to the new hotshot young doctor. Ms. Hollins comes to his rescue, helping him navigate the town politics, and recognizing the need for some fresh blood in the medical field, offers to be his first patient. Sure enough, utilizing more recent medical information, he's able to take her off her hypertension medication as it's not recommended based on her results. Margaret then offers to throw Ross an open house to to help him meet and network with the townsfolk and build up his patient base. Meanwhile, bored at home, Molly decides to scope out their fully furnished barn to see if she can get any good shots. Here, she finds nature hard at work and becomes enamored with its boundless majesty. That evening, Molly suggests Ross face down this web as a form of acclimation therapy to get over his fear of spiders. On the way out, we learn that his crippling fear stems from his first memory as a baby. A disgusting, hairy spider invaded his crib and crawled all over his helpless body, instilling in him an instinct to freeze in response to a spider's threat. Regardless, he climbs the ladder and takes a face shot from a desiccated rat, and the couple runs off giggling while a bubbling mass throbs nearby. The next day, we see that there are parties all over town. Ross is busy trying to get between the blue hairs and their lust for deviled eggs so he can talk medical conditions and their treatment. While back at the barn, the broodlings are absolutely popping off and venturing into the surrounding areas. As the guests filter out and Margaret basks in the glow of a successful party, an unassuming arachnid lies in wait. It seeks to grow fat on the house cat's sweet juices. Unfortunately, after being put out, Ms. Hollins is now the only animal left in the house. The next day, while working in the cellar, Ross discovers why it's worth spending a bit extra on an experienced home inspector. Molly offers to call the exterminator if Ross goes to check on Margaret, who she can't reach. When he gets there, the paper is uncollected and the cat is still outside. In the aftermath, Metcalf declares her dead by heart attack, which they blame on Ross taking her off her meds. With no authority or influence, Ross is unable to compel them to conduct an autopsy just to be sure. However, in a positive turn of events, Mr. Beechwood takes pity on Ross and requests he come by the gym later so he can throw him some business. We then get the pleasure of meeting Delbert, who arrives at the Jennings residence to assess their termite problem. The main points to take away here are that Delbert's a goofball, as implied by his musical accompaniment, and also that aside from the rotted wood, he curiously doesn't find any actual presence of termites. While this is going down, Ross arrives at the gym. He and Henry exchange pleasantries about rural life, but also note the recent conspicuous absence of crickets singing their evening song. Then Ross heads down the line, cupping some sacks and making himself a quick $50. Afterward, at practice, we see the brood has been spreading through town, with one soldier even finding its way into Miller's helmet. So as the boys run a play-action nickel with an audible, Miller ends up going down and declines to get back up. Ross sets aside his notations of scrotal tenacity to rush out and provide aid, but after missing the spider when it casually saunters out of the helmet, they're all left holding their own scrotes wondering what the hell happened. We learn later that this series of events has earned Ross the unfortunate moniker Dr. Death. Lamenting the recent misfortune brought upon them by his upstart rival, Metcalf decides to relax a little by slipping his slender hog into the comforting warmth of his loafers. But he gets bit. He is immediately thrown into a sizable seizure, providing the key bit of evidence he would need to try to crack this thing wide open. Except he's DOA. However, with him now out of the way, Ross is able to convince the county coroner to perform an autopsy. Although, as the town's new physician by default, Ross barely has a chance to follow up on it. When complete, the coroner does confirm a minute amount of an unidentified toxin found in Metcalf's system. With something to go on, Ross calls for some exhumations to gather additional evidence. In the meantime, he does warn the family to be wary of the dangers of spiders and the importance of steering clear of those you see. He then does research into the night and falls victim to a rabid cricket attack, a lone survivor of the unseen spider-cricket war happening all around him. While he's busy diddling that one, a couple of boss spiders pull an egg sac into his cellar. His research leads him to Dr. Atherton, the top spider man on the west coast whose curiosity is piqued when the town named Canaima holds some vague recognition in the back of his mind. So he sends his assistant Collins to check it out, and he's lucky to arrive just in time for them to start examining some rotting corpses. Before he can step out for a quick puke, they find bite marks on each of the bodies. The next step would be quarantine, but this exceeds his authority, so he calls Dr. Atherton to confirm his expertise is required. The next day, a crack team of arthropod enthusiasts enter Margaret's home to search out the culprit. With evidence and set up shop in the backyard, they know they're closing in. As they ponder this, Lloyd finds the prize in his cereal box. Since the preference would be to find a live one, they continue on and eventually end up in a staring contest with the harbinger of their doom. Collins convinces Ross to run a distraction so he can try to nab it, as if it doesn't have an abundance of eyes. But in fairness, his technique does work. Meanwhile, at the Beechwood residence, the spiders are practically having a party, as one uses the playful tickling of the water to blend in and descend Becky's torso. The end result of this is a post-puberty nightmare. They call in Delbert for an emergency extraction of the pests, and upon running across one on the back deck, he finds this breed to be remarkably impervious to the typical spray formula. But he always has the boot as a backup. After taking care of that problem, Del then saunters off like a true badass. Atherton finally shows up and learns that Ross has connected the dots for him between the excursion in Venezuela and Manley the photographer, who was a resident of their town. They then inspect the specimen's triple sacs and test its venom, which has an alarmingly immediate effect. Atherton then lays it all out. These dickless soldiers are part of a highly organized colony, the likes of which have only been seen in the Venezuelan sample. It's an apex species led by a general dickslinger that, in this environment, is no longer bound by geography. If the queen is able to finish a breeding cycle, the outcome will be a whole host of childbearing offspring that will look to expand out to new territory. So game over. They presume the point of origin to be the mortuary where the casket was received, and since Irv has the phone off the hook, they posse up. We find Irv in a social media blackout so he and his wife can enjoy Wheel of Fortune, a tradition that severely dates this movie. Along the way, Collins discusses the ideal nest location.
Dark, warm, moist, a musty smell.
I like the cut of your jib, my friend.
And you'd probably see an egg sac, pulsating about the size of a softball.
Where would one sign up? But by the time they arrive, the Kendalls have been sucked dry. When Atherton goes to leave the office, Molly's photography sets him off in a different direction. He and Lloyd roll up to the barn, and luckily, he brought a jar, so they should be all good. Atherton sends Lloyd off to fetch the others. Except after failing to find the nest, they've already figured out the correct location based on the radius of initial victims. As they drive in that direction, Delbert points out that the barn is not ideal for a nest, but he finds that he's casting his pearls before swine as they dismiss his valuable input. Back at the barn, Atherton bafflingly enters the den and rings the dinner bell, ultimately reaping what he sows. Then the trio arrives and Delbert uncorks his private stock of insecticide, made of his own formula that proves to be fairly caustic. He employs it as the others go to check the house. Ross ventures in real slow and quiet-like, creeping out his family in the process. Then they find a real good reason to be creeped out and are forced to run up the stairs to hide. Unfortunately, doors are essentially useless in this scenario, as their assailants file in through every crack and crevice, looking to find warmth in all of their cracks and crevices. As they exit, Ross delays too long, forcing him back into the house. Delbert tries to work his way in from the outside as Ross takes the elevator down. Unfortunately, he pressed the button for the basement rather than the lobby. Now every itch feels like spiders to him, but the area is actually relatively arachnid-free, due to the presence of the queen, of course. He attempts to excuse himself, but is relentlessly pursued. Despite the size differential, he can barely do more than flaccidly swat at her, but then she surprises him into scream-tossing his shovel into the breaker box. He then searches for and finds the egg sac, which is pulsating in a rhythmically seductive way. He goes to innocently burn it to a crisp when the general rears its ugly head. Ross ends up stuck under what must be a full 10 to 15 pounds of wine rack, but he manages to get out somehow and chases him down with a makeshift flamethrower. And damn it if he doesn't start having some fun with it. He listens acutely for any movement and readies himself, but is not ready enough. In the ensuing struggle, he ends up supine with that hairy bitch crawling up his leg, reverting him to a baby-like state in which he becomes frozen in fear. He uses a wayward stick to catapult the general across the room and then pulls off a lucky nail gun shot that sends him into the nest, annihilating the entire species. A truly sad story. As we close the movie, we find this all to have been an indictment of country living, as they happily settle back into their San Francisco apartment, never addressing the question of how they're gonna raise their kids now that they're back in the city. And then nature gets the last laugh. That was an effective and harrowing horror movie, despite the attempts to lighten the tone. I would love to know in the comments if you can think of any horror movie that has since presented such a specific and simple threat as effectively. As we now move to examine the most practical strategies for survival, I think it's important to first acknowledge the ways in which different types of people may respond to this type of scenario in different ways. To do that, we're going to take a moment to review the impact evolution has on some of our responses to specific dangers. Deep down somewhere in the depths of our brains, possibly in the pre-primate portions, lurks a natural instinct to avoid sudden and unexpected dangers. It's what helps animals survive in the wilderness, and in certain cases, it is most effectively employed in the avoidance of very specific hazards. As an illustrative example, let's take a moment to enjoy the feline involuntary response to an unexpected cucumber. The sudden appearance invokes a deeply ingrained response cats have learned to exhibit when presented with serpentine threats. I have my own anecdotal experience of a similar type. Once, after returning home from a road trip, I was walking by my rental car when some slender little finger-like legs started reaching out from the wheel well. I caught this only out of the corner of my eye and instantly jumped sideways away from the car. When I looked over, I saw that a praying mantis had hitched a ride from somewhere and was now checking out its new environment. The thing is, as soon as I saw what it was, all the adrenaline and anxiety that had instantaneously gripped me had washed away. There was something instinctual specifically about the spider possibility that prompted an automatic response from my body. This is something to consider as we discuss our options, but is also important to acknowledge in that it's exhibited behaviorally in the movie. One of the many lovers of high school football practice had an instinctual response to spider presence, without ever even actually seeing it. Collins does point out when he's trying to convince Ross to help him that we have a particular neural transmitter designed to help us move past the fear. But it also seems a healthy dose of fear is a benefit in terms of survival. This is somewhat confirmed by Ross defeating the Queen by way of an impulsive fear response. In addition, it should be noted that the converse could also get you in more trouble, as those among us who are disinclined to fear spiders also seem more likely to want to give them a hug and a cuddle instead, which is not recommended in this case. Considering that, let's take a look at a few key points of interest here. Now, the obvious first step is to decline to go where one doesn't belong or bring things that don't belong back to other areas. The problem is that Dr. Atherton, as is likely the case with many scholars looking to make a name for themselves in their field, is just too thirsty for knowledge and the prestige that comes with a novel discovery. This is not balanced sufficiently with a similarly robust reverence for the destructive power of nature. As an example, as you go to seek out your tepui, if the locals are unwilling to go to a place, you should probably avoid those places. Or at the very least, you could inquire as to what legends or folklore have caused them to take their current position, to get a better idea of what you're walking into, because it's certainly not the butterflies that are the problem here. The departure of their guide is accentuated when Manley sticks his face in a web of sufficient size to require taking a pause in a consult before moving forward. Despite this, they do what they came for and greedily collect their precious samples in a way that demonstrates a wanton disregard for the sanctity of nature. You really are asking for it when you drop a fat deuce on Mother Earth. Figuratively, it's pretty much impossible to avoid literally deucing on the earth, and in many ways it's actually very helpful. But that's just a cautionary tale. Most of us are not going to the Venezuelan rainforest, nor are we returning with unregistered biological material, so we should really be focusing our energies on what to do in a domestic situation in which a threat currently exists. The first obvious answer, if you live in this sort of area with sizable spiders, is to keep your eyes open at all times. Sometimes the upper corners of rooms do surprise us because we're used to having a central focus at eye level or below, but it's always a good idea to take a glance about to verify what's lurking just outside your field of view. This would have been of great benefit in the shower, especially where the water source itself was engulfed in webbing. As paranoid as checking everywhere for spiders all the time may seem, it's doubly important in this scenario, because you're going to be removing your clothes. Aside from the easy access to biteable areas, having a large insect on your naked body only ensures some deep emotional scars to go along with any physical injuries you may sustain. There are also a variety of simple daily preparations you can take, like shaking out your clothes before putting them on and storing your shoes upside down. But then, if an engagement is unavoidable, you have to engage in the correct way. It doesn't actually bother me at all that insecticides don't work, because I don't really abide by poisons. If you put out some rat poison or spray a cockroach with some severe chemical that doesn't work, then you just have a chemical-coated angry insect residing with you in some hidden location, tracking its nasty chemicals all over. Or, especially bad in the case of the rat, dying later in a hidden location you can't get to. Now you're living in filth. No, once you go in, it's time to go all in. Of course, the goal is still to minimize the risk of physical contact, because it's equally awkward to injure but not kill some large crawly thing that then runs off somewhere hidden to plot its revenge. Who hasn't ended a standoff with an encyclopedia only to return sometime later to clean up and find no bug carcass underneath? That is terrifying. As an example, we'll review the strategy Ross used against the coat hook shadow in his bedroom at night. This is a safe one because it wasn't actually a giant spider, so we don't have to worry. Now, if you even suspect a spider of anywhere near this size, why do you have a rolled-up magazine? The primary goal should be to kill it in a way that pins it to its location to ensure it doesn't skitter away or circle back on you, but from a sufficient distance that you have time for a second chance should you fail in the first. There is a proportional relationship between the size and danger of the insect in question and how long your device should be. In this case, I'm thinking a closet rod, possibly the backside of an empty drawer from your dresser. The key is to be creative, and few things promote innovative problem solving like fear of death. Using a shorter melee weapon could be okay in some scenarios, like using the towel against the horde at the end. In this case, you are alive through sheer luck anyway. You're not facing down an individual enemy that's just lying in wait, you're trying to keep a large quantity of them away from your skin. Although this rule would still apply if you intend to capture rather than kill, like during the face-off. This bitch is staring directly into your eyes and matching your movement. A wine glass is insufficient in that it requires you to get too close to realistically secure a successful capture. Really, what we're establishing here is the importance of keeping an appropriate distance. Your enemy is smaller and quicker. You're going to want to leave yourself some lead time to get out of its way and avoid it. For instance, after all Ross had been through, was he so full of himself, so confident in his own abilities that he would search for the general by putting his face up to the various places he thought it might be hiding? Who among us, when tracking a large bug surprise, would get their face this close to where they suspected the bug may be? This is ludicrous. Moving one level higher, there are broader concerns at play here. Aside from managing the 1v1, you still have to come up with a viable strategy for taking down the brood as a whole. Luckily, due to the short lifespan of the sexless soldiers, this mostly revolves around finding the nest and ensuring the queen doesn't get a chance to mate, which happens to be one of my specialties. The first step is to not enter the barn. If you do, certainly don't go into the midst of their feeding den. The threat is somewhat known, but somewhat unknown. Why prompt it to come to you rather than pursue it after ascertaining its location? What was the plan here? The doctor knows that the soldiers are fast and quick to bite, and I've rarely seen a man more pink and delicious than Atherton here. You have to stay back and stick together. Approach the house quickly if there are no signs of danger and make your intent known to the family immediately. Call them to you and usher them away. Be wary, but don't hesitate, and there's no reason to seek out individual spiders here. The main goal is safety and containment. This is why the most obvious final solution is fire. You simply can't live there anymore. I know it's hard when you're talking about all your earthly possessions, but the situation really does call for fire, applied liberally and indiscriminately. If you want to be ready to repel your spider overlords, you have to be prepared to walk away at a moment's notice. It's kind of like heat, except if Bobby De Niro were referring to a real-life prepared response to a spider infestation. If you do happen to find yourself in the depths and going toe-to-toe, this may be the one point where having an unreasonable affinity towards spiders could become beneficial, because this point is exactly where you'd want to have the courage to begin hugging aggressively for the sake of salvation. Before we go, I'd like to give a huge thanks to my donors memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. Any donation unlocks uncensored movie reviews of Life Force and Under the Skin, with others to be added over time. And if you enjoyed the video, I would love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.